Okay, everybody, it is now 9:45, and I'm deeply impressed to see so many people here on a Saturday morning. It's just staggering, and I know that John is very thrilled by the prospect of having such an audience. If you fall asleep, we'll notice. So you mustn't fall asleep, you must prop yourself up as he's speaking. But no, you don't need to do that because it'll be so wonderful. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Hi, definitely thanks for coming on a Saturday morning. I want to congratulate us all for sticking around to talk about search performance, and then at the same time maybe get a little worried about us. But mainly, I think we should feel excited that we have stuck around. I'm used to Charleston, sort of in the small rooms at Francis Marion, where we're kind of all in a small little group. So I'm going to try not to wander away from the mic. I usually tend to wander around a little bit. So if you can't hear me, if I kind of step off to the side, start flapping around or something, and I'll try to get back to a nice sort of podium stance up here. And I'll also try not to fall off the podium. So again, thanks for coming. I'm John Vickery from NC State Libraries. And I need to back up. My colleague, Karen Ciccone, who I worked with closely on the project, was unable to make it to the conference. I wish she could, but unfortunately she couldn't make it. We were originally scheduled to present this together. So what you see me presenting, we definitely work together as a team, and then that's also part of a larger team effort. So this definitely wasn't just me. I should be up here with several other folks who couldn't make it today. So today I'm going to talk about a project that a team of us did at NCSU to compare the search performance of Summon, EBSCO's Discovery Service, and Google Scholar. Here's what I'll be covering. I definitely plan to leave time for questions, so hopefully we can kind of have a little bit of a discussion afterwards, or don't feel shy to ask questions at the end, or even grab me afterwards if you want to just kind of take the discussion offline. I'll start by giving a little background about the project and our objectives. We'll then get into the methods of how we coded and analyzed the data. And I'll talk about the idea behind randomization tests and why we use that method. So if you pulled up the blurb to the talk, you saw I mentioned randomization tests. So another thing that I think is kind of exciting for us to be talking about today. And then finally, we'll take a peek at the results of our comparison. So a minute ago, I mentioned that the project was a team effort. It was put together by our web scale discovery product team. Karen and I wrote about the project in an article for Evidence-Based Library and Information Practice. The article was published, I think, in February or March of this past year. It's open access, so Google it, pull it up. You can read it now while I'm giving you the talk. And if you really want to kind of take a deep dive into some of the idea of randomization tests a little more and how we implemented them using SAS, you can take a look at an article I did for the SAS Global Forum this past spring. If you follow that link, or maybe Google the conference proceedings. And then if you want to maybe implement the code yourself or really start playing around with it, the code's in the conference proceedings paper as well, but you can check out the GitHub space and download the code and play around with it. I should say I program in SAS, but I know you could implement the tests we did in R or Python or pretty much any analytics language of your choice. So what I'll be talking about is how I did it in SAS. I'm not going to get into the code and whatnot, but that is SAS code on GitHub and in the conference proceedings. But again, you could implement this in several different ways. And again, also, if you decide to take a look at the code and you have questions, please get in touch with me. I'd be glad to talk about it more. Okay, so a little bit about the project. Similar to many libraries, NCSU, we've invested quite a lot of time, effort, and money into implementing a web-scale discovery service. So we think it's important to periodically review the landscape, review competing products, and see if they would be, maybe it'd be a better fit for us because of price or effectiveness or any other considerations. So our web-scale discovery product team is charged with testing and evaluating our existing service as well as other potential products. Our team is made up of about 9 librarians. Some of them may be in the room now, but I'm not sure. If you are, you can flag yourself down. And we cover several departments in the libraries. We try to touch all of them. We range from public services, tech services, collections, and IT. And at NCSU, we've been using Summon since 2009. Something a little different about how we use our discovery service, we primarily use Summon to populate the articles section of our quick search application. So if you can kind of see that, I've been in a couple presentations here and they tend to get, screenshots kind of tend to get washed out. But if you're a user at NCSU's library's website, we present folks with sort of the large single search box. If you were to enter a search in there, that search is spread out into both our website, article results, and book results. So what we're using our discovery service for is to populate this article section, these article results. So we'll give you the top 3, and then if you click See All Results, you'll be passed into the Summon interface. Most of our users don't actually even get to the Summon interface, and this has implications in how we design the test as well. But back when we implemented Summon in 2009, it was actually, I think, the only discovery service that had an API that we could leverage for this purpose. So 2009 was a long time ago, and since, of course, other services have the API functionality, in particular EBSCOs that we wanted to evaluate. So in April and May of 2014, we set up a trial of EDS, and it was during that time that we ran the tests. So we were testing in the spring of 2014, data analysis over the summer. Of course, there's been other really good studies that compared discovery services. I'd encourage you to take a look at these two from 2013. Asher, Duke, and Wilson compared the performance of Summon, EDS, and Google Scholar. And their study quality was judged on whether or not articles selected by test subjects were scholarly publications, so peer-reviewed articles. Roshkin, if I'm pronouncing that right, published a study that compared user performance for search results from several of the available discovery services. In that test, subjects were presented with a side-by-side view of two discovery services, and they were asked to select which result set they preferred. Both of those studies had test subjects enter hypothetical searches. And so the main difference between these two and our study, and where we think our study contributes to the literature and to the community, is that we used actual user search queries from our Summon logs. So we actually found the actual text that was entered into a search and used that as the basis of our search, as opposed to asking users to enter in, maybe pick some searches that you think you might want to do. So the primary objective of our study was to answer the question of which discovery service produced better results for the type of searches typically performed by our users. And we can get a sense of what typical is by examining the Summon search log. So what I was mentioning before, as opposed to hypothetical kind of try to come up with a question on your own, we were actually drawing the real researcher questions that our users, faculty, students, staff, we didn't know who they were entering into the search. So the Summon logs contain the actual queries that users entered, and from looking at the logs, we know that about 3/4 of the searches are for topical type, sort of broad searches where you're looking for, a general area, and about 25% are known item type searches. So this would be where a user actually pastes in a citation to an article so they know exactly what they're looking for and they're going to go get it. Or maybe they typed in, a title keyword and a piece of the title of the work. So because of how these two searches differ, we wanted to separately evaluate how the discovery services handled them. So here's a couple examples. This shouldn't look particularly surprising to anybody, but you can see that the difference. These are actual searches from our logs of known item search queries on the left and topical search queries on the right. So when we're looking at our search logs, this is the kind of how we're going to see the difference in those. And we would have had, again, about 75% of the searches be the topical and 25% be known items. So you can see where someone just actually pasted in the citation to that internal medicine article there. Okay, so in the title of the presentation, we talked about Google Scholar. So far, we've kind of just touched on Summon and EDS, but we needed to consider our 800-pound Google gorilla. So why did we throw that into the mix? So first, I should say that discovery services like Summon and EDS, they offer clear benefits to libraries that Google Scholar doesn't. In particular, Google Scholar's terms of service, they don't allow results to be presented outside of the Google Scholar context. So at NCSU, where we use the API functionality to populate that articles section of our quick search app, we couldn't do that. Even if we decided we wanted to sort of say, okay, we want to use Google Scholar, we can't use it in the way that we have our environment set up now. So we also know that the Google universe is sort of the go-to place for many of our researchers. We could maybe say most, I'm not sure. So we really wanted to see how that fared as well. Okay, so now we're going to start getting down into the weeds a little bit with the methods. This is kind of the part where I get the most interested, and sort of my interest is usually inversely related to other folks' interest. So I got a little nerd alert. So hopefully this is the kind of stuff that you might want to talk to me about later, or just kind of hang on and we can get through it. Okay, so let's talk about how we coded and analyzed the data. The first and probably the most important thing that we did, again, was to use those actual user search queries from our Summon search logs. So we wanted to try to replicate the experience, really see what our users saw as closely as possible, to try to really replicate what results they were getting. Now, it's not uncommon for these searches to have punctuation errors, because people probably type better than me, but you're going to get extraneous characters, sort of overly broad topics, but we kept those exactly as they appeared. So if someone had mistyped something, we just copied and pasted that query into our test to see how it worked. So a few examples. You can see where there's a G in front of plants, or some misspellings, or new class of drugs patent, maybe something that doesn't sort of come off as a well thought out topic, but it could have just been mistakes in the typing, or how the student or faculty framed the search. Another really important aspect of the methods was that we generated a random sample from the search logs. I know we all know that this is basic standard practice, but it was really important for us to get a representative sample, or a representative data set to test. So we started with about a complete year's worth of Summon search logs, and we generated a simple random sample, so no stratification, just a random sample of 225 queries. The 225 number we felt like was large enough to be representative, but it also worked well with our team of 9 members, because we gave each team member 25 queries to test. A couple team members weren't able to actually complete their test, so our final analysis data set was down some from 225, but it still, after sort of some post hoc power tests, came out sufficient to detect an effect that we wanted to detect. Okay, so team members, these are the nine of us, we use our judgment to classify each query as either topical or a known item search. And going back to that slide I showed a minute ago, it was generally very easy. In our discussions amongst the team, we didn't have a whole lot of talk at all about, I couldn't decide, was this topical or not? It really was quite clear. So that was our first decision point. Was this query a topical search or a known item search? And we're going to split our analysis based on that. For topical searches, we recorded the number of relevant results within the first 10 results. And we used our judgment again to consider a result relevant if it matched the presumed topic based on kind of title and abstract only. So we didn't really dig deep into the result list. We tried to, I guess in a lot of ways, we were trying to put ourselves in the frame of a user or a student maybe, and say, if you're scanning this result list, you're not going to necessarily read every article. You're going to make the decision at that time, is this relevant? Do I want to dive into it more, or pass? For known item type searches, we asked there 2 questions. One was, did you find the item? And was it in the top 3 results? We know from some of our testing that it's relatively uncommon for folks to actually get past those top 3. We limited ourselves to the top 10. I think in a future test, if you wanted to really get even more strict, you could say limit the entire test environment to just the top three results. Since we used a random sample, the distribution, the topical to known item, that mirrored the overall distribution. So again, within our sample data set of 225, we had about 75% of those were topical questions and 25% were known item. And at this point, we've got the data set up for 2 different types of analysis. For the topical searches, we have count data. And for the known item searches, we have binary sort of yes, no, categorical data. Okay, so after all the team members coded their data, we had a series of spreadsheets that looked like this. These are examples of the known item searches with the yes, no. Team members, this is sort of half the spreadsheet. The way we presented it to our team members was a spreadsheet with a list of their 25 queries to test. They needed to make that first judgment of topical or known item, and then they'd respond in the various columns depending on how they determined it, whether it was known item or not. And this would be how they recorded the topical or broad searches. That's what we also called it. So for the topical searches, the way the test was designed, we had the data set up appropriately for a repeated measures ANOVA, so analysis of variance. And what that test is designed to detect is any overall difference in the average number of relevant results for each of the 3 products. So in a repeated measures ANOVA, you test each subject multiple times, once under each condition. And let me show you how we were viewing this as that setup. So you can think of the query text as the subject. So, and the conditions, condition 1 would be testing under EDS, condition 2 under Summon, condition 3 under Google Scholar. So, just kind of in general, you may see this kind of design in like a medical study or something where one individual was given 3 different drugs over different periods of time, but it was the same individual that was being tested. So in a sense, the query text is the individual and the discovery service is the condition that we tested under. So we pulled the data into SAS. Again, like I said, you could use other analytic tools. SAS is the one I tend to use. And the first stop was to make some plots or some graphs of the data and get some basic stats. I'm going to kind of jump ahead a little bit and show you the plot of the known item searches first. And when I saw it, it was kind of like a little bit of a spoiler for the results section because it was a pretty boring graph. It was like a tie. So in some sense, we didn't always need to run complicated analysis. After kind of viewing this, we thought, well, that's kind of interesting. It's a tie. I'll make a comment though about the data set are 44. That got a little too small after some of the folks had to drop out of the test. So sort of in a follow-up, this would be an area that you'd really want, or we would really want to address, is to kind of take a deeper dive into the known item type queries. We had a large enough data set for the topical searches, but this was kind of pushing the boundary on known items. So this would be a spot to sort of a weakness of the study and where we really want to evaluate it more in depth. And then for the other question of was it in the top 3 results, all but 1 of the queries was in the top 3 for Summon, and all but 2 for EDS and Google Scholar. So again, really close, basically in some sense a tie for those, for the known item type searches. So let's go back to the topical searches. These are the average number of relevant results for each of the 3 discovery services. Summon and EDS are basically tied. You can see 4.76 and 4.83. That's really close. And then you can see that Google Scholar had about 1 additional relevant result per result set within the first 10. So overall, these are coming in really, really close. When we plotted it out, you can see the distribution of the number of relevant results. So you see EDS is blue, Google is red, and Summon is green. You can see where they had the frequency of 0 relevant results, 10 relevant results. And so we've got the distribution from 0 to 10. And you can see that there's enough variation to kind of warrant a closer look. So different from the known item, we're kind of seeing a little more variation where we want to kind of dive a little deeper into it. But at the same time, this is where I started to get nervous about using a regular repeated measures ANOVA, because like all statistical tests, there's assumptions that you have to meet. And one of them, you can read whether or not this is one you need to worry about all the time or not. But one of them is that the data should be normally distributed. You get your nice bell curve, and this is really, really, really not a nice bell curve. In my analysis work, I typically don't get a nice bell curve. One day, I feel like I'm going to find one, but in library data, I never do, ever. But one day, maybe I'll just get a nice normal distribution. So in order to get around the possible violations of the assumptions, of a regular repeated measures of ANOVA, we decided to use what's called a randomization test. Now, the concept is, could be maybe a little complex, but I kind of find that randomization tests are, in a way, easier to conceptualize than the normal parametric equivalent. So what in the world is a randomization test? The concept goes back to the 30s with R.A. Fisher, there's a picture of him, and others. And the basic outline of the randomization test, you might see it called a randomization test, a permutation test, is that you randomly shuffle the data and repeatedly calculate your test statistic. And the p-value, that marker of statistical significance, where you want it to be under 0.05 or 0.001, is the fraction of how many times the test statistic for the shuffled data, that rearranged data, is equal to or more extreme than the observed test statistic. All right, if you're still awake, give yourself a cheer. You just made it. Okay, now the practicality of the method, however, was limited by computing power until relatively recently, because even with small data sets, the number of possible permutation gets really, really big, really fast. So our data set had 139 observations, so 139 rows, and the way we were permuting the data was within that row. So we would take an answer from EDS and put it in the summon slot. And this is randomly generated. So or the number recorded for Google Scholar and slot that into the EDS slot. So the formula that gives you the possible number of permutations of that is 6 to the 139th power. That's actually, I put that in and tried to put all the zeros out there. It's a really huge, huge number. So that's why they weren't doing it into the 30s, because they couldn't write fast enough. But you don't actually have to do it that many times. Typically, you'll see randomization tests done in the low thousands or 10,000s, which for your computer is nothing. You can run a randomization test and do 10,000 iterations of it, and it's really quick. So the basic steps: you calculate your test statistic. In our case, we were doing ANOVA, so we chose the F statistic. That's the standard one for ANOVA. You rearrange the data, like I was saying before. You're going to shuffle it up, and then you're going to calculate the test statistic for the shuffled up data. Then you're going to do number 2 and 3 many times. I heard a presentation the other day, and someone was referring to this as like wash, rinse, repeat. This is kind of where you're reading the back of the shampoo bottle. You're doing number 2 and number 3 many times, but your computer's actually doing it. And then your p-value is the fraction of how many times the statistic for the rearranged data that all of it put together is equal to or more extreme than the observed test statistic. Okay, so let's look at the results. You've kind of suffered through the methods. We saw that the known item searches were basically a tie, but the topical searches where we applied these randomization tests. Okay, histograms. I love histograms. I think they're fun to look at. Hopefully you do too. With the topical searches, our randomization test showed that there was an overall difference. If you think back to that table where I showed you the average results, we had Summon and EDS as a tie and Google just about 1. But what we're looking for is whether or not that slight difference was due to chance or whether or not there was an actual overall difference. So here's what it looks like plotted out, the results of our randomization test. And what you want to notice about this plot is the area of the graph to the right of the red line. It's that little bitty shrunk down spot. So that's sort of the graphical representation of the p-value. That's our p-value of 0.002, which is that's a small number, and so that's strong support for an overall difference. Basically, what we're seeing is that it's really unlikely that we would have gotten our observed difference, our observed F value of 6.3 just by random chance alone. So we're saying to ourselves, wow, there really is a difference in these 3 products. Now again, the difference was slight, but there really is a difference. It wasn't just chance. Now, our ANOVA test, or randomization test, shows that there's an overall difference, but it doesn't show us where. So we don't know which discovery service is accounting for the difference. I mean, we kind of have an idea of that based on our table of looking at the average number. But in order to figure it out, we had to do pairwise comparisons. So we did more randomization tests, this time comparing the possible pairs. So Summon to EDS, EDS to Google Scholar, and Summon to Google Scholar. And here is what we got comparing Summon to EDS. What you want to take away from this graph is, as opposed to the previous one, is the large p-value and the shaded red areas. What this tells us is that there's essentially no difference in the way we measured relevant results or in our test between Summon and EDS. So if we have Summon and EDS folks here, you're basically tied according to the way we tested it. So I don't know, you can take it out into the hall and see who's really winning. Now, I think a lot of times when you read studies, you get excited for a difference. I mean, we were excited to see a difference based on our the F test that we did a minute ago. But this sort of no difference, this tie, for us at NCSU had really important implications. It actually was really, in a sense, very helpful because it meant that we could basically take performance out of the evaluation equation. So when our team is looking at which product to choose and what factors to weigh, we can say to ourselves, performance isn't one of those. in our case, in the way we tested it, performance isn't in the equation. So we can focus on back-end functionality, the knowledge base piece that comes with the discovery services. We can focus on user interface. So our user research team might want to go out and do a test and just focus on which interface works best for our users. Or we can look at cost. So it's basically just simplifying our decision making, which was really important and really helpful for us at NCSU. Okay, so what about Google Scholar? This is Summon compared to Google Scholar, and you'll notice a difference here, as opposed to a lot of red. If you can actually see it, what you want to focus on is the area again to the right of the red lines, and just very little red shaded area, and that's the graphical representation of our really small p-value. So again, this is saying that Summon, in fact, according to our test, did significantly, in a statistical sense, outperform Summon. So Google really did have better results. I'm sorry. You said that wrong. Say it again. Oh, this is showing that Google Scholar did, in fact, thank you, outperform Summon statistically. Okay, and so now we've got to compare EDS to Google, and no surprise, we basically another version of that previous histogram. Again, we saw a slight difference with Google Scholar outperforming by almost one relevant result, and our randomization test showed that that was super, super, super unlikely to have been just based on random chance alone. So again, Google Scholar did outperform it as the way we tested it, both Summon and EDS. And again, this has important implications for us at NCSU. On the one hand, we're not able to plug Google Scholar into our infrastructure the way we've designed it and the way we want to use it. But we can also say to ourselves, I guess, that our users are actually getting good, relevant results when they choose to go to Google Scholar, which we know they are. So basically the same story between EDS and Summon. Google Scholar did actually outperform them, but you recall that it was a relatively slight difference. So a few takeaways. Summon and EDS basically tied, so they're going to have to duke it out in areas outside of performance, or maybe that'll change, and if we redo the test at a future point, or if any of you guys decide to, you might see a difference in the performance. But for us at NCSU, it took performance out of our evaluation equation. It simplified our decision making, and we were able to focus on cost, back-end performance, and user interface. Google Scholar came out slightly ahead, like we just saw. Again, it's kind of important for our users because we know that's what they're using. And this is my little takeaway, hopefully, that you guys might want to consider a randomization test as something in your toolbox of hypothesis testing. It might be an option for your data because, again, in my experience, I typically don't get nice normal data. So it's been helpful to have sort of a more robust non-parametric test that we can turn to. Thank you very much. Definitely happy to answer questions if you have any.
I think it's best. Oh, the question. That's amazingly speedy. Good God. I'm so pleased.
Was it?
Can I go?
Please go ahead and just say your name, please. And
Melissa Belvati from the University of Prince Edward Island. You said you're a customer of Summon, but presumably not EDS.
Right.
I did a little presentation yesterday about customizability, and EDS can range from 250 million records to 2.5 billion records, depending on the particular optional databases you choose to include in it. So different customers can't necessarily, without knowing your particular EDS configuration, draw any conclusions. Can you tell us more about your EDS configuration?
So what we configured EDS to be as closely matched as possible in the test to how we would implement it if we had it. So we matched the way we had set up Summon. We put in all the have summon sort of the way we have it scoped in our environment and then turn EDS wide open. We tried to match them as closely as possible. And again, I mean, this started as a decision-making project for us at NC State. If you were to test it in your environment, it's really possible that you could see something different. For us, this helped us make our decision. You might want to use the tools, and you can set that up in your environment and see which helps your local environment, your school make the best decision.
Hi, Stephen Francoeur from Baruch College. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you worked with your team to ensure inter-rater reliability when we were looking at the relevance of the search results.
Yeah, that's a really good good question. And what we did was not do it correctly.
Sorry, what did you say?
We didn't do it correctly.
Okay.
Which was why, in a sense, that our randomization test was helpful because you can get around some of those. It's a little more flexible. You can get around some of those mistakes. But in a future study, if you wanted to sort of learn off of our mistakes, I would recommend you do that. And in the paper that Karen and I wrote up, we said yes, that would have been an improvement to the study was to do inter-rater reliability.
Thanks. That's very interesting because that was the question I was going to ask if I had to ask a question. And now I might just add, I spend most of my time as an information science researcher, but actually, and I put my hand to my heart, I'm not trained as an information science researcher. I'm a publisher, I'm a historian. So I learned these things gradually. But one of the things is I was going to ask you is presumably the relevant results were different in each case, or partly different.
Explain how you...
Yeah.
Meaning, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Well, if you got results through EDS, they would be different from the results from Google, say, but there would be some overlap, but
right.
not entirely.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Now...
Some relevant results are more relevant than other results, as I'm trying to say. For a researcher,
sure. No,
some relevant results are a waste of time, and you can see immediately if you look at them.
Right.
But you say you can't really judge that if you're looking at these things because you're not the researcher.
Right. We were looking for what we would, we were trying to put ourselves in the shoes of the user, in a lot of sense, maybe a student user, and say, if you were scanning down this result list, would you say this was something you wanted to click on and maybe read, or was this just not worth your time?
Yeah, for a student it would be easier, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Please go ahead.
Hi, Matthew Bailey, Rhodes College. I noticed that you did all the testing on the averages. I could see another useful metric being how often there was nothing or almost nothing relevant in a search. Did you do any testing to see if there was a difference there or if it was statistically significant?
No, we haven't. But you could modify this to do that. I mean, when you look at that distribution that was that U-shaped, you could kind of see that the higher ends, there was either, it was more common to have nothing or to have a whole lot. Sort of the middle area of just a nice 5, 6, or whatever was less common. But it was not uncommon to have just no relevant results. And again, that could be because, again, we kept the queries as the users entered them. So maybe they put in just a completely junky query. And so you're going to get nothing if you have just terrible spelling, but we wanted to see how the services kind of handled that. And maybe they could correct the spelling or whatever.
Right,
so,
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is this lady coming for a question? Yes?
I wasn't here part of the time, but I'm interested when you say relevant results.
Right.
Across all three, there were different relevant results?
Yes, I've just established that, yes.
Oh,
yes,
different references.
Yes, but there was some overlap, obviously. Is there anybody here from either ProQuest or EBSCO who can dare identify themselves? No, they're hiding under a chair. Okay. I asked John earlier that Primo wasn't in the picture, and that was because you didn't have Primo. So
that's correct.
Fair enough.
When we were doing the test, again, it started as a decision-making process or a project for us at NCSU. We're summon customers. We're still summon customers, actually. And we were deciding, did we want to consider a switch to EDS? So our team, we wanted to take everything into consideration, so we thought we'd test performance and see. But we did not go out beyond EDS and Google Scholar. We stuck to just those
fair
three.
enough. But I wonder if anybody knows what's going to happen. I mean, is there any talk about whether Primo and Summon are going to merge in some way, in the sense that they are going to merge their database, which has been suggested, but keep their interfaces, so they're still different products. Has anybody heard anything on these lines? No. Have you?
I have not.
No. Because it's an interesting question, actually. Thank you.
The party line right now is going to remain separate products.
Yeah.
Similar to EBL library. That's what is currently being said. Who knows down the road what will happen, but currently that's
Did you hear that? They're going to remain separate projects. That's what they're saying. Separate products in the same way as EBL and EBRI are remaining separate products, which I didn't know was the case. They've been talking round and round about that. Okay. But my understanding is Summon and Primo would have very different interfaces. Or so I'm told. Yeah? Anybody else got anything much more concrete and sensible to say than what I say?
Well, I won't warrant sensibility, but I'm Scott Matheson from the Yale Law Library. I have a question about the known item searching.
Right.
Is there anything in your data, or could you resample from the logs to find more known items
Yes.
to do an analysis, to aid in an analysis of actual coverage?
Explain what you mean by coverage.
So is this known item, is it a failure because the citation was typed wrong, or is it a failure because this data is just not in the knowledge base of that discovery service?
Right. That's a good question. And that would be great to go back and do, but we have not done that yet.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey.
I'm Rosemary Del Toro from Marquette University. I think we all know that ProQuest and EBSCO's discovery services don't play real well with the others' databases.
Right.
And so I think we would get a very different result depending on which databases, first of all, you subscribe to and how you did set it up. You said you tried to set it up similarly, but if you really did put the EBSCO databases in, which maybe you can't even do, it wouldn't come out the same. So did you put your ProQuest databases in for,
Yes.
the EBSCO ones in for the EDS testing?
Right.
Setup?
And
Could everybody understand that question? Yes? Sorry, it wasn't against your question. It's just I was asking. Everybody understands, okay?
And another sort of, we are also, we're big ProQuest customers, we're big EBSCO customers, so we have a lot of both. Some of it's through direct subscriptions from our libraries, and some of it's based on our NC Live, the statewide consortium. They tend to have to go heavily with one particular vendor, and that's shifted throughout the year. So we tend to have access to a lot of ProQuest content, and at the same time, a lot of EBSCO content. So we were pretty well covered in what was put into the systems.
Hello, my name's Phil Jones. I'm from Digital Science. Now, at the ALPS conference earlier on in the year, I believe it was EBSCO did some usability testing.
Right.
And they observed the way that people were using discovery services and how particularly younger students and younger researchers were finding content. And one of the things that they found was that the way that they actually discover content is different to the way that they say they discover it. Because a lot of people go into Google or something similar to discover what they're going to find, to do the kind of non-known item search, and then go to the library portal in order to do known item discovery per se, but really they're using it purely to authenticate. Now, have you thought about doing usability tests and observing some of your students and your faculty to see what course they're taking? My concern is that although that difference in relevance is small between Google Scholar and those web-scale discovery platforms, you might find, I'm worried that that researchers might prefer to do the discovery outside the web portal, outside of the library portal entirely, and be essentially, bypassing those library services that you're paying for.
Right. No, I mean, I think that's basically why we decided to put Google Scholar in the mix, is to sort of, we want to make sure our money is spent wisely. We don't want to just spend money on a discovery service if Google Scholar does it all for free and better. But like I mentioned before, there are things that we need that discovery service to do even beyond discovery in a sense. I mean, it is for discovery, but we rely on the back-end knowledge base and other features. So we did want to see, what would happen if our users were just using Google. Were they getting good results? But that's a good point. I think that would be an interesting way to kind of poke a little further into it.
I think we've now come to the end of our time. I think it's 1 minute or half a minute to go. And so I want to say how grateful I am for this presentation, and I think we all agree. So shall we?
Thank you.